The Georgia heat of 1848 was a physical thing, a wet, heavy blanket that smothered the town of Macon. It clung to the skin, seeped into the lungs, and promised no relief, much like the institution that owned Ellen and William Craft body and soul. For them, every dawn was a reminder, every sunset a seal on another day of servitude. Hope was a dangerous currency, one they couldn't afford to trade in openly. But in the hushed, desperate whispers of the night, in the small cabin they were allowed to share, they minted it in secret. William, a man of formidable skill and quiet strength, would watch his wife in the flickering candlelight. Ellen, with her skin so fair she could be mistaken for white, was a walking paradox. Her complexion, a painful inheritance from a cruel white father and a slave mother, had been a source of torment and unwanted attention her entire life. Now, it was to be their weapon. The plan had come to William in a feverish dream, an idea so audacious it felt like madness. But madness was a close cousin to the desperation that fueled them. "You will not be a woman," he had whispered to her one night, his voice tight with a mixture of genius and terror. "You will not be black. You will be a white man, a gentleman, and I will be your slave." The words hung in the air, thick and suffocating as the summer heat. Ellen's heart hammered against her ribs. To become the very thing she despised, a slave owner? It was a monstrous thought. Yet the alternative was a lifetime in chains, the constant threat of being sold away from William, their love torn asunder by the callous whim of a master. The fear of that separation was a greater monster than any disguise. "I will do it," she had breathed, the words barely audible, but sealed with the finality of a death pact. The preparations began in the shadows. William, a master cabinet maker, used his privileges of movement to procure the items, piece by agonizing piece. A fine gentleman's suit of clothes, dark and imposing. A tall top hat that would help conceal Ellen's face. Green-tinted spectacles to hide the fear in her eyes, which she was certain would betray them. The most difficult part was the posture, the voice, the entitled air of a white man of means. They rehearsed endlessly. William would play the part of an impertinent ticket agent, a suspicious conductor, a prying passenger. "Speak lower, Ellen," he'd coach, his voice gentle but firm. "From your chest. Do not raise the pitch at the end of your sentences. You are not asking a question. You are giving a command." Ellen would practice for hours, her throat growing raw. She learned to walk with a confident stride, her shoulders back, a stark contrast to the deferential, downcast posture beaten into her since birth. She bound her chest tightly, the constriction a constant, painful reminder of her charade. To account for her smooth, beardless face, they concocted a story. She would be a sickly young planter, Mr. Johnson, traveling north for medical treatment. To avoid signing documents, as she could not read or write, her right arm would be in a sling, pretending to be injured. The night before their departure, a profound silence enveloped the cabin. They didn't sleep. They held each other, two souls on the precipice of an abyss. They were leaving behind their friends, the familiar if painful rhythms of their life, for an unknown world where a single misstep meant torture or death. "Are you ready, my love?" William whispered, his breath warm against her ear. Ellen pulled back, her eyes meeting his. The woman she knew was already beginning to recede, replaced by the grim, determined facade of Mr. Johnson. She gave a single sharp nod. There was nothing more to say. Their journey began in the pre-dawn chill. The walk to the train station was the longest of their lives. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat. Every distant shout was a cry of discovery. Ellen, as Mr. Johnson, walked slightly ahead, William a respectful 2 paces behind, carrying the luggage. The performance had begun. The station was a chaotic swirl of noise and steam. White passengers bustled with an air of purpose, while black porters and slaves moved around them like ghosts. Ellen felt 100 pairs of eyes on her, boring through her disguise. Her heart pounded a frantic rhythm against her ribs. The sling on her arm felt flimsy, the spectacles a pathetic shield. They approached the ticket window. A burly man with a florid face and suspicious eyes peered out at them. 2 tickets to Savannah, Ellen said, her voice a low, practiced baritone that felt alien in her own ears. The man grunted, his eyes flicking from Ellen's pale, nervous face to William, standing obediently behind her. He took in Ellen's fine clothes, the sling and the green glasses. His gaze lingered for a moment too long. "Mr. Johnson, you say?" the agent drawled, leaning forward slightly, a glint of challenge in his eye. "Traveling with your boy here?" "That is correct," Ellen managed, her hand inside her coat pocket trembling. The agent leaned back, a cruel smirk playing on his lips. "It's just, you look awfully young to be a slave owner, sir, and awfully frail." He paused, letting the silence stretch, thick with menace. "You'll need to sign the register for yourself and your property. It's the rule." Panic, cold and sharp, seized Ellen. This was it, the first test, and they were already trapped. She couldn't write. The carefully constructed plan was about to shatter before they had even bought their first ticket. William stood frozen behind her, helpless. The entire station seemed to fade into a dull roar, the agent's smirking face the only thing in focus. He pushed a ledger and a pen towards her. The silence was deafening. The tip of the pen gleamed under the lamplight of the station. It was a weapon aimed directly at the heart of their plan. The ticket agent's smirk widened, sensing victory. Ellen's mind went blank with terror. Her throat was a desert. The world narrowed to that ledger, a graveyard for their hopes. Just as the silence became unbearable, William took a half step forward. It was a perfectly measured movement, not insolent, not panicked, but dutiful. He dipped his head respectfully towards the agent, but his words were for Ellen. "Master," he said, his voice steady and calm, a rock in the swirling currents of Ellen's fear. "Begging your pardon, sir, but you know the doctor's orders. With your arm in that state, you ain't to be straining it for nothing." Then, turning his gaze back to the agent, he spoke with the practiced air of a trusted servant. "My master has a terrible inflammation of the rheumatism in his right arm, sir. He can barely lift it for a fork, let alone a pen." The agent's eyes narrowed, shifting from William back to Ellen's bandaged arm. The story was plausible. A wealthy, infirm young man would certainly travel with a valet to handle such matters. The excuse was a shield, and for a moment it held. Ellen, seizing the lifeline, gave a short, pained-sounding grunt and shifted her sling as if in agony. The agent stared for another long second, chewing the inside of his cheek. He was a man who enjoyed his petty power, but challenging a white gentleman, even a sickly one, carried its own risks. With a sigh of annoyance, he waved a dismissive hand. "Fine, fine. Just make your mark. I'll witness it." He dipped the pen in the inkwell himself and pointed to the line. "An X will do." Ellen's trembling left hand took the pen. The cold, wet metal felt alien. She clumsily scratched an X onto the page, the ink bleeding slightly into the paper. It was a crude, misshapen thing, but it was enough. The agent stamped their tickets and shoved them through the grill. "First-class cabin for you, Mr. Johnson.
The Negro car is at the rear for your boy. Freedom, for now, had the bitter taste of ink and fear. The train was a rolling, clattering microcosm of their world. Ellen was guided to a plush seat in the main cabin, a space of relative comfort populated by the very people she was impersonating. Planters, merchants, and their wives, all exuding an air of effortless ownership of the world. She took a seat by the window, keeping her head angled down, the brim of her top hat and the green spectacles her only armor. The whistle shrieked, and the train lurched forward. Through the window, she watched the platform slide away, and with it, the last of the world she had ever known. Then came a new, chilling horror. She saw William, along with a dozen other black men, women, and children, being herded into a car that was little more than a wooden box on wheels. There were no glass windows, only slats. He would be cramped, suffocating, and utterly at her mercy in the eyes of the world. The physical separation was a chasm that ripped at her soul. She was alone.
A few hours into the journey, the seat beside her was taken by a portly, well-dressed man with a booming voice and an overly friendly demeanor. "Traveling far, Mr. Johnson?" he asked, extending a hand. "Senator Clayton, at your service." Ellen's heart leapt into her throat. She gave a short, stiff nod, avoiding the handshake by gesturing again with her sling. "To Savannah," she mumbled, pitching her voice as low as she could. "Ah, Savannah, a fine city," the senator boomed, undeterred. "And your boy there," he said, nodding towards the rear of the train. "Is he a good hand? It's so hard to find a reliable Negro these days." Every word was a spark on a trail of gunpowder. Ellen had to respond, to play the part of the casual, racist slave owner. "He serves his purpose," she replied, the words tasting like poison. The senator laughed. "A man of few words. I like that. I imagine your illness is a great burden." He leaned in closer, his voice dropping conspiratorially. "I knew a man once, looked pale as you. Turned out his wife was part octoroon. Polluted the bloodline, you see. You must be careful where you get your stock from, son, both in the field and in the house." The senator's words, meant as chummy advice, were a direct, unintentional strike at their very identity. The cabin felt suddenly airless. Ellen feigned a violent cough, a racking, painful sound that shook her frame. She pressed a handkerchief to her lips, using the moment to hide her face, to regain control. "The dust. My lungs are weak." The senator recoiled slightly, all friendliness replaced by a selfish fear of contagion. He muttered a quick excuse, and to Ellen's immense relief, moved to another seat. The encounter left her shaking, drenched in a cold sweat. This was the razor's edge she had to walk for 1,000 miles. They changed from the train to a steamship at Savannah, the humid sea air doing little to calm her frayed nerves. The boat was even more intimate, more inescapable than the train. Here she encountered a new kind of peril. A young military officer who had recently been stationed near Macon. He didn't know her, but he knew her former master, Dr. Collins. He cornered Mr. Johnson on the deck, eager to talk of home. "You're from Macon, you say? Then you must know Dr. Collins. A fine man. I dined at his home just last month. He was complaining about losing one of his best cabinet makers, a clever fellow named William Kraft, I believe." Ellen's blood ran cold. The world seemed to tilt and sway, not from the motion of the ship, but from sheer terror. She could feel William's presence somewhere on a lower deck, a silent scream passing between them. The officer was looking at her expectantly, waiting for a response, a sign of recognition. Her disguise, her entire life hung on the next few words from her mouth. She opened it to speak, but only a dry, croaking sound came out. The officer's words hung in the salty air. "A clever fellow," named William Kraft. The name, spoken aloud, was a physical blow. Ellen's breath hitched. For a terrifying second, she was no longer Mr. Johnson, the invalid planter. She was Ellen, the runaway slave, exposed and doomed on the deck of a steamship. The officer's polite, expectant smile was the face of a hangman. Summoning the last of her reserves, she forced the character back into place. Mr. Johnson was weak, but he was also aloof, entitled. He would not be intimately familiar with the affairs of his neighbor's property. She drew herself up, a subtle gesture of aristocratic annoyance. "The name is not familiar," she said, her voice a dry rasp. She coughed again, a shallow, dismissive sound this time. "One hears all sorts of names. My own affairs are trying enough without keeping a ledger of every tradesman in Macon. One hears all sorts of names. My own affairs are trying enough without keeping a ledger of every tradesman in Macon. Now, if you'll excuse me, the sea air is not agreeing with my condition." Without waiting for a reply, she turned and walked away, her stride as steady as she could make it. She did not look back. She could feel the officer's gaze on her, a prickling heat on her neck, but she did not falter. She found a secluded corner and leaned against the railing, her body trembling so violently she feared she would collapse. She had survived. The mask had held, but it was growing heavier with every passing hour. The rest of the journey to Baltimore was a blur of suffocating anxiety. Sleep offered no escape, filled with nightmares of capture, of the spectacles being torn from her face, of her woman's hair tumbling down, of the jeering, triumphant faces of her pursuers. She barely ate, the food turning to ash in her mouth. The disguise was no longer just clothing. It was a cage she was trapped inside, and it was crushing her spirit. Baltimore. It was the last gate, the final barrier between slavery and freedom. They disembarked the ship and made their way to the train station for the final leg of their journey to Philadelphia. The air in this city felt different, still hostile, but charged with a frantic energy. It was a place of departures, of endings and beginnings. For them, it was about to be the former. At the ticket window, a new, more terrifying obstacle awaited them. The agent, a man with a cold, bureaucratic face, listened to Ellen's request for 2 tickets. He then pointed to a freshly posted sign. "New regulation," he stated flatly. "Due to the recent number of runaways heading north, no colored person is permitted to travel beyond this point without a bond being posted by a credible white gentleman. You'll need to come with me to the station master's office to sign the papers and prove ownership." This was the blow they could not deflect. This was not a suspicious question that could be answered with a clever lie. It was a wall of rules and regulations, of ledgers and signatures and proof. They had no proof. They had no bond. They had nothing but a desperate, unraveling story. The agent motioned for a security officer. The end had come. After 1,000 miles of terror and ingenuity, they would be captured here, in the sterile light of a train station office. William, standing behind her, seemed to shrink. All the fight went out of Ellen's eyes, replaced by a dull, bottomless despair. The weight of Mr. Johnson, of the hat, the sling, the entire charade became unbearable. She felt herself begin to sway. "Is there a problem here, gentlemen?" The voice was calm and authoritative,
A man stepped forward, dressed in the crisp uniform of a naval captain. He was an older man with kind, tired eyes who had been on the same steamship as them and had observed the sickly young man and his devoted servant from a distance. The ticket agent puffed out his chest. "This gentleman," he said with a sneer, "needs to post a bond for his slave as per the new regulation. He needs to come to the office to be verified." The captain looked from the agent's hostile face to Ellen's pale, exhausted one. He saw the genuine tremor in her hand, the sling, the green glasses hiding whatever terror lay beneath. He had seen sickness and fear before. He made a decision. Perhaps it was pity. Perhaps it was a flash of human decency. Or perhaps he simply disliked the petty tyranny of the ticket agent. He turned to the agent, his voice leaving no room for argument. "I know this gentleman. He and his servant are under my protection. I will personally vouch for their passage." He placed a hand gently on Ellen's shoulder. "The young man is very ill and needs to get to Philadelphia for treatment without delay. Now, please, give him his tickets." The agent's jaw dropped. To challenge a respected naval captain was a far greater risk than letting one more slave pass. Defeated and resentful, he snatched the money, stamped the tickets, and shoved them through the window without another word. The final train ride was silent. They were past fear, past exhaustion. They sat, separated by the length of the train but connected by a thread of fragile, unbelievable hope. As the train rattled on, the landscape began to change. The fields looked different. The air tasted different. Then a conductor walked through the cabin announcing, "Next stop, Philadelphia."
They stood on the platform, the cold northern air a shock to their lungs. Around them, people of all colors moved freely, without the palpable weight of master and slave that had defined every space they had ever occupied. The performance was over. Slowly, as if waking from a long and terrible dream, Ellen raised her hands. Her fingers fumbled with the string of the spectacles, and she pulled them away. She took in the world with her own eyes for the first time in days. Then her hand went to her top hat, lifting it from her head. She shook her head, and her cropped hair, matted from the journey, fell loosely around her face. Finally, with a gasp that was half sob, half cheer, she tore the sling from her arm. She was no longer Mr. Johnson. She was Ellen Craft. She looked at Willem, truly looked at him, not as a servant, but as her husband. Tears streamed down both their faces, freezing in the cold air. She had worn the mask of her oppressor not to become him, but to destroy his power over them. In the heart of a nation that had enslaved them, they had forged their own freedom, armed with nothing but courage, love, and a gentleman's disguise. They were free. Please like this video and subscribe for more forgotten histories.